This gentleman here asked me earlier, kind of a bullet point of what is the benefits of a land patent. I want to go through that with you because very good question, very good question. Number one, to bring your land patent, it's proof of your sovereignty. You and I are sovereigns, and by law, only sovereigns can own land. I didn't say real estate, I said land. Real estate is an administrative term, and it's used in the administrative rules and statutes and codes. Okay? The second thing to issuing or bringing your land patent forward is the very fact that you have protection. Protection. You say, well, protection from what? And I can honestly tell you, if you defend it, from almost anything that's an attack upon you and your land. Because it is instituted by God and is reaffirmed in the Constitution under Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, 432. And it's called the land disposal portion of the Constitution. And in that disposal, it is an authority, but it's also a directive to Congress to dispose of the lands to you and I, so that we can acquire that land and go be productive, raise our families, raise a garden, raise cattle, cut timber, whatever the issue is. And I want to say something here, and I want you to listen carefully. All wealth comes from the ground.
Amen.
Okay? Got a very interesting, I don't like to call it an argument, but it was almost that. With a guy that owned a whole chain of McDonald's. Very wealthy man. He said, that's not true. I said, what's not true? He said that all wealth comes. He said, I make about $17 million a year selling hamburgers. I said, really? I said, I have a couple questions for you. He said, what's that? I said, where'd you get the beef? Where'd you get the buns? Where'd you get the paper? Where did the building, the blocks, the bricks come from that made it? I said, how do you get to work? He said, I drive. I said, what made the car? Where did the products that made the car? He looked at me like a deer in the headlights. Wealth comes from on top of the ground, trees, crops, whatever. Or it comes from under the ground in the form of mineral development. One of the patent issues, we're going to get into that in a minute, and I'll share with you, there are 11 different types of patents. And that patent, the mineral estate, is phenomenal. And it is so misunderstood, it is so abused, the political sector think, we're going to shut you minor down. I have a film that I was sharing with Joel. Joel, where are you? There he is. And the title of this film is called Out of the Rock. Phenomenal. And in that film, it's a mining educational film. The question is asked, what would your life be like without mining? Okay? Doesn't matter your political affiliation here, folks. You better set that aside for the point I'm trying to make. And it's asked again, and then the camera focuses in on a woman who's in her kitchen. That's a woman's domain, isn't it? Her kitchen. Wow, that's great. I thank God for you women. And the question is asked one more time. What happens without money? The clock on the back wall disappeared. The toaster disappeared. The coffee pot disappeared. The window disappeared. The countertops disappeared. The stove disappeared. The oven. Everything in that home, poof, was gone. And if they'd taken it to the degree that it rightly should have gone, there'd be no house. You wouldn't have them a dress, polyester, shoes, glasses. Your glasses are a product of the mine product, result of a mine product. Your watch, your computer, your cell phone, fiber optic, paint. Goes on and on and on. It's endless. And one of the patents is mineral patents. Because of that came out after the Civil War, our forefathers understood the very fact that we better protect the mineral estate. And I'll tell you one other main reason why it's so important. It is tied directly and significantly to national defense. Okay? How do you set a radar unit up to detect incoming enemy aircraft or submarines, or build a submarine or an airplane, or weapons, or canteens? If you're interested, go to your computer and look Title 30, Section 1801 and 1803. You'll find that it's tied to national security, and rightfully so. Okay? Back to page 7. The American people, newly established sovereigns in this republic, after the victory achieved during the Revolutionary War, became complete owners of the land and beholden to no one. Getting back to your question, sir, about the benefit, the bullet point. You're beholden to nobody. No building permits, no taxes, nothing. Now, having said that, I want to make freedom comes with responsibility. And freedom comes with accountability. So what you do with your land, don't hurt your neighbor. Okay? Because you don't want him hurting you. That's why you work together. You talk. You have coffee together. Invite him over for dinner. What's your plan about your land? What can I do on mine to help you? And vice versa. We've lost that. We've lost our honor, I believe. We've lost our honor. And there's nothing going to get right until we take personal responsibility and we reestablish our honor. When you give your word to something, you don't need a contract. If our handshake doesn't bind you and I, the paper we wrote it on is worthless, isn't it? Amen. It's worthless. If your words go to no good, then your signature's no good. I was talking to Rex this morning coming in, and I write a lot of contracts and have for years. Studied a lot of contract law. Most of my the most pages that I've ever had in a contract was 3 pages. But I try to make it 1 or maybe 2. You're saying, well, why is that? I spell out the items, who's involved, what the terms and condition is, what the time frame is, and we both sign it. Attorneys have got into the practice in a lot of instances of putting all these legalese all into something to fight over. When in fact the whole focus of the contract is missed. Oh, let's fight over this plastic that's sitting in this direction instead of this one. How dare you? That's done all the time. One thing I learned in law school that is taught, not in my class, but it was taught to us that it's done in administrative law school. Controversy is an attorney's best friend. I'll charge you 200 bucks an hour for something he could solve if he would put his heart in it and really look at the protection of the individual. Because one day those attorneys and judges will stand before God. The Bible says that your sin will ever be before you. That isn't just the day of the judgment. That means throughout eternity. There's a lot of debate over that issue. I'm not here to cast anything on anybody. But what's in that Bible is either true or it isn't. And if it isn't, we better throw it in the trash. But I've never seen it fail. Never. Psalm 37, verse 25. David said, once I was young, and now that I am old. In other words, he'd spent a lifetime. I have never seen God forsaken those who love him, who are called according to his purpose, nor their children go hungry. One version says, begging for bread. Same thing. He's faithful. The question is, are we? Our handshake. Am I faithful to my commitment to you? Are you faithful to your commitment to me? No matter what the cost, we shook on it. That was my dad. That was my dad. And my mother too. My dad was a spiritual giant. We're going to take a break in a little bit to let you folks stretch your... Let me finish this up. These freeholders of the original 13 states now held a allodial title to the land that they possess. If you want to know about possessory, go to Title 30, United States Code, Section 53. That has to do with the mineral estate in that particular instance. But it talks about the possessory title. You heard the term, possession is 9/10 of the law. See, that's a possessory right. And there's always somebody going to come along and try to tell you that you don't have a right to possess what's yours. This new and more powerful title protected the sovereigns from unwarranted intrusion or attempted takings of their land. And more importantly, it secured them the right to own an absolute in perpetuity. What is the word perpetuity?
Forever.
Unending. Getting back to answering some of your questions. You have a piece of property that is to be secured in perpetuity without end. Doesn't that go along with on the patent that it says to their heirs and assigns forever? There must be something to this stuff then. You look at the Magna Carta, the very fact that the term forever relative to the heirs and that is mentioned multiple times. Multiple times. Let's take about a 10-minute break. We're back. Turn to page 9 if you would. I want to share with you very quickly so we can move on. These are the different types of land patents. They're listed. There are 11 different types of land patents. And therefore, number 1 is a cash entry patent as an entry that covered public land for which an individual paid cash or its equivalent. There are not very many of these. And the reason being is that they did this when there was a need to get the land under private ownership for a particular project or whatever. Land patents were to be issued by virtue in the way of a grant. These are a grant, but they're called a cash entry patent. They were actually paid for, and they're not supposed to be. But there were situations they had to make a concession for, if you please. Number 2, credit patents. These patents were issued to anyone who either paid cash at the time of sale or received a discount or paid by credit in an installment over a 4-year period. If full payment were not received within the 4-year period, the title to the land would revert back to the federal government. That's what a credit patent is. Number 3, which most of you are under here, and that's a homestead patent. And a homestead patent allows a settler to apply for up to 160 acres of public land, and if they lived on it for 5 years and proved of cultivation and improvement, this land did not cost anything per acre. But the settler, did pay the filing fee. And most of your lands here are under that type of a land patent. Military warrant patents. Number 4. From 1788 to 1855, the United States granted military boundary and warrants as a reward for military service. Thus, warrants were issued to various denominations and based upon the rank and length of service. Number 5, mineral patent. This also applies much in Montana as well. The General Mining Law of 1872 defined mineral lands as parcels of land containing valuable minerals in its soil and rock. And there were 3 types of mineral patents that were issued under that. Number A is a lode claim patent. Okay? Contains gold, silver, or other precious metals occurring in veins. In other words, in place rock, if you please. Number B is a placer patent. And the placer patents are minerals not found in veins or lodes, lode formations, get it right here, Ron, loose gravel, etc. They're called alluvial. In other words, they've been moved by water or glacier. Number C, mill site claim patents are limited to the lands that do not contain valuable minerals, and you could patent up to 5 acres to do your processing for your mining operation. Okay? Number 6, on page 10, private land claim patent. The claim based one of the assertion that the claim of this predecessors and interests derived the right while the land was under the domination of a foreign government. Not too many of those either. There are some, but not many. Number 7, the railroad patents. A lot of these. A lot of railroad patents. Railroad patents to aid in the construction of certain railroads. The Act of September 20th, 1850 granted the states alternate sections of public land on either side of the rail lines and branches. Number 8, state selection patents. Each new state admitted to the Union was granted 500,000 acres for public land for internal improvements establishment under that act. Number 9, swamp patents. Under the Act of September 28, 1850, lands identified as swamp and overflow lands unfit for cultivation was granted to the state. Once accepted by the state, the federal government had no further jurisdiction over that parcel. Now, I want to stop there a minute. Pretty interesting, isn't it? Then what is the EPA doing running around the country, fining people, threatening people, taking people to court on the swampland issue? Does an agent of the United States government have authority to do that?
No.
No. See, there's an element in our country of assumed authority. In other words, they just decide that they're going to do it. They just assume they have the authority.
Has that been to court?
It's kind of like the taxes.
Has that been to court?
Pardon?
Has that issue been to court?
Yes.
And
Yes.
the judges went along with it?
Yeah. Let's go on here. Town site patents. An area of public land which has been segregated for disposal as the urban development, often subdivisions and blocks, and to further subdivisions into town lots. That's where you get your meets and bounds and your lot numbers and all of that, okay? Because there were places that people began to congregate, and then therefore those definitions and patents had to accommodate that. Number 11, town law patent. May be regular or irregular in shape, and its acreage varies from that regular subdivision. Then I put a notation on that regular homestead patents, anyone applying for a homestead patent was required to do a mineral examination with the boundaries being claimed for patent to determine whether the minerals were found, If minerals were found within that said boundary before the patent issue, then the mineral did not pass with the patent. That's known as a noble decision. I want to read you something. I have a patent here, and it says subject to. Subject to is the reservation on a patent. Okay? Most of the subject to, I can't cross the line, I got in trouble. Just kidding you. The subject to clause on a patent, and it's important that you understand this, is for the purpose of protecting a proprietary right. In other words, somebody that had a right before the patent was issued. And in that, initially when they issued homestead patents, that they just lived on it for 5 years and they issued the patent, and come to find out that it was more mineral in character than it was of agricultural use. So Noble, who was the director of the General Land Office, a lot of conflict came between the miners and the farmers, the agricultural people. And to bring peace to that issue. See, here's an interesting thing too. You know what the purpose of the law is? Have you ever thought about this? The purpose for law is to bring peace, not controversy. That's why we have the law of God. You stay within those bounds. God said, I'll protect you. I'll watch over you. I'll bless you. And on it goes. Okay? But that subject to clause was for the purpose of protecting miners' rights, ditches, ditch right-of-ways, mineral holdings. Getting back, the gentleman was telling me here about being restricted going into his property. That subject to clause means that they can go down that ditch line, they can go down that right-of-way or whatever it is, and not be hindered by you, the landowner, because it's a proprietary right. First come, first served, so to speak. Doesn't mean that they own the land. It means that they have a right to use that. That's on almost, not all, but a great deal of your homestead patents. Okay? The railroads are by far the largest patented landowner in the United States. Almost without question, every railroad land where there's a railroad or a siding or whatever is still under the original patent. Never been taken out. They're not subject to regulation, and the Transportation Division tries to put rules and regulations against the railroads. The railroads have been accommodating, but they don't have any authority to do that. Okay? Oh, the paragraph, second to the last paragraph on page 10. The reason that being at mineral lands of the United States is, and as of today, considered to be a separate estate. It's known as a subsurface estate versus a surface estate. That's what the subject to clause addressed. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, the mineral is underneath the agricultural ground. The mineral right in these situations where you have a separate estate, the mineral estate is dominant. In other words, the landowner of the surface cannot restrict, infringe upon the right to remove the mineral. Now, there's an accountability. Whatever land that is disturbed or any damage that's done, the mineral developer has to pay the surface landowner. That's to keep everything in balance so that the mineral people don't go in and tear it up and leave the landowner with a useless piece of ground because he had a right to the mineral. But again, that's a good neighbor policy. Okay? Alrighty, on to page 12. I'm not going to spend much time on the additional land patent information. You can read that when you have time because we have a lot to cover here today. I want to read at the bottom of page 12, the last paragraph. It talks about the land patent, and I quote, "This is the only lawful method of a perfect title can be held by the grantee's name." And there's a court case there, Wilcox versus Jackson. There's a Littlefield versus Register, and on and on. And I've got a lot of court cases in this book here, in case you haven't had a chance to look. Okay? On page 14, top of the page, the patent is prima facie conclusive evidence of title. Now that brings up, see what I did with that. I'm going to throw a little bit of a trick question here to you. This is an actual copy of a land patent. Okay? And I have a copy of one of mine in the back of it, toward the back of the book. This is only the evidence of your title. You're going, what? Everybody think this piece of paper is the title. No, it's not. It's the evidence of your title. Your title is in the law. You with me? And it's an enactment by Congress. We call them congressional acts. And that act of Congress has said that the land will be disposed by allodial title to the person who applies for it, and if you qualify, then it's yours, lock, stock, and barrel, without any encumbrances, and you get the authority and jurisdiction with it. So they give you evidence of that, and that's called a letter patent. That's what these are. I have one here from Canada, same thing. Canadian land patents are 2 pages. For those of you who can see, I'm kind of flinging them around here. But all of these patents, every one of them without question, says that there are signs, heirs, and assigns forever. Now I'm going to pose a little bit of a hypothetical question. If every patent has that on it, then it must mean something, doesn't it? One would think so anyway. And it's a reminder to everybody that views a patent that it is in perpetuity without end. And I've had some heated discussions with judges in chambers relative to this very subject matter. Not a one ever has been able to show me to where the forever clause has ever been removed, or that it can even be removed, because it cannot. These are perpetual. This patent is just as effective and with authority and jurisdiction and standing today as it was in the 1800s when it was issued. It's a present patent, not a past history. I get government people trying to tell me all the time, oh, those are no good. I have attorneys tell me, oh, you don't use those anymore. They're no good. That's old stuff. My question again, how long is forever? How long is perpetuity? It was intended to be just that, folks, to protect you, the landowner. Okay? Another issue, getting back to your question about the benefits, a land patent cannot be collaterally attacked by anybody except the United States government within 2 years of the date of issue. There's no provision in law to collaterally attack a land patent. Now I want to talk about mortgages a moment. How many of you have a mortgage on your land? Okay? How many of you do? And if a person gets behind in their payment and the mortgage company wants to come and take your land for it, there's no authority in law to take that land. None. 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 Because a mortgage is not a title. A mortgage is a lien position relative to money that has been extended. You understand what I'm saying here? Banks and judges and courts have been treating foreclosures as though the bond between the promissory note and the trust deed and the land is one. You default, we take it all. A number of things wrong with that concept, folks. And here it is. Number one, it's a violation of the intent of Congress. Number one. Number two, it's in violation of the Supremacy Clause. Number three, it violates the Forever Clause relative to the land patent, the letter patent. That is concrete, if I can use the term, in law. It's by congressional act that's backed up by the power of treaty. Now, I'd like anybody to show me who think a mortgage has a right to come and take the land. Another problem with that is that it's an unjust enrichment. There's an element of law called unjust enrichment. That means when you do something relative to your action or an action in court of which you have undue benefit to you that you don't rightly deserve. You with me? Yes?
So mortgages are enforceable.
You have to speak up. I can't hear you.
So mortgages are enforceable against warranty deeds, but not patents.
That is correct. And we'll get into that. A warranty deed is under administrative law. A land patent is under common law and constitutionally protected. Very important that you understand that. I have never been able to understand why an attorney does not turn around and go and defend. He could have business forever trying to help somebody save their land instead of allowing it to take it or be instrumental in taking their land. I think there's going to be an accountability to that the way I read my Bible, and I'm speaking for me here. There's a wonderful place for attorneys. I'm not throwing stones at all attorneys, I'm not. But I think there's a great problem with the priority about our legal system today. You see evidence of it everywhere, okay? The bottom of page 14, if a land grant patent is not challenged by any and all claimants are talking about when you post your land patent sandwich, if you're going to bring your land patent forward. That has to be done by law within 60 days of the posting. The first day that you post your paperwork to bring your land patent forward does not count, because the courts have said it's got to be a full day to be counted. So you do not count. So in other words, you leave it on the bulletin board or whatever for 61 days. If there is not a challenge to the standing of your land patent, now understand this, it's got to be a legitimate challenge. It can't be a frivolous thing or you have cause of action against the perpetrator. But if somebody's got some legitimate paperwork that really needs to be taken a look at, they have 60 days to do that. If they do not, your paperwork, as well as in law, bars them from ever making a claim toward that. Okay? Alrighty. Next one, page 16. The law on rights, privileges, and immunities. When a land patent is transferred by patentee, title and rights of a bona fide claim purchaser will be protected. Top of page 16. In other words, it's mandatory for the court system to protect a bona fide land patent. Gets back to the Supremacy Clause, doesn't it? Article 6, Clause 2, United States Constitution. All judges are bound. Now let's talk about that a moment. A judge can't affirm a land patent in a lower court setting because they're bound to do that. But they cannot rule against it. They do it, but there's no lawful standing to do that. And the Constitution says, and there are case law on that, that when a judge violates his oath, he wars against the Constitution. Violating your property and your property right is warring against the Constitution. The framers of the Constitution made it absolutely clear, and I've read all the documents, I have the documents, states that that land is to be protected. Even the United States government once issued the land patent after the 2-year period of time cannot assault that land patent. They have 2 years, and only 2 things apply, of which gives them authority, the government who issued the land patent. And that's for fraud or for obvious error in the paperwork. Only 2 items. Not because they feel like it, not because the political winds are blowing that direction. There has to be evidence of fraud, or there has to be true evidence of clerical error. That's only for 2 years. Okay? There's a time limit. There's a very famous case called Fletcher versus Peck. And it basically states, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it states there that when the grantor divests his ownership and relinquishes to the grantee, there is an immediate and perpetual estoppel. An estoppel means just that. You're barred from proceeding any further. Okay? Fletcher versus Peck. It's in the book a little later on. I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit. Okay. Go to page 18. And I stuck this in because I come from Oregon, but this equally would apply to Montana and any other state. But this just shows the preamble of the Admissions Act for Oregon when they applied for statehood and became a state. This says preamble, whereas the people of Oregon are framed and ratified and adopted the Constitution of state government, which is a Republican in form. I want to stop there. Our Constitution guarantees, both our federal Constitution and our state Constitution, all of them, that we're guaranteed a republic form of government. Where is it? We're operating as a democracy, not a republic. That's why when you notice when we get into the land patent stuff, at the heading of the documents that I'll show you that's in the book, that it's a republic. And it has to be in that jurisdiction in order to bring that land patent forward and to make your certificate of acceptance. Land patents to bring forward have to be accepted. I read all kinds of stuff on the internet. I've read papers to where they only use what's called the Declaration of Land Patent. That's absolutely worthless. And the reason being, the land patent is already being declared. You can't declare that. You acknowledge it by your certificate of acceptance of that Declaration of Land Patent. You understand what I'm saying? The land patent, the letter patents, are what we define in law as prima facie evidence documents. And that simply means it says what it says, and it means what it says. Until it's overturned, it stands as read. It's like an affidavit of fact. When you give your personal testimony of events that you personally are aware of, you do it in what's called an affidavit or an affidavit of fact. Unless that's rebutted item by item within 30 days, it stands forever. So if you ever have to do an affidavit, keep that in mind. Republic form of government. We're guaranteed that and we're not practicing it. And we wonder why we've got all the problems that we have. Getting back to the 2 wolves and the baby lamb voting what they have for lunch. That's what that means. Mob rule, if I can put it in another context. 2 people can outvote 1, so you lose all your personal and individual rights and you use your property. That's a democracy. Every democracy in history and I'm an avid history buff, both biblical and our national history, has ever survived a democracy. Every single one has gone down in flame. That's what's made our country so unique, because our foundation was God-based. Our foundation was a republic. You can rule you better than I can, huh? And you and all the rest of you. What right have I got to come and tell you what to do or how to do it or when to do it? And then charge you for the privilege of trying to dominate you. Insanity. Absolute insanity. That's what we're doing. I want to share a thought with you folks. And please hear what I'm saying. I believe there's three types of people in the world that I've observed in my 67 years. First one, those who make things happen. And there are some people in here who are doers. Okay? And God bless you for it. We're made by the Creator, and we need to be creative with our God-given gifts, I believe. So the first one is those who make things happen. Number two is those who watch things happen. And the third one is those who wonder what happened. Okay?
Which is the majority?
Do I really need to answer that? Just kidding. I appreciate your people. But understand this, folks. We laugh at that little statement that I made. But unfortunately, it's true. And having said that, I want to pose a question to every one of you in this room. Which one are you? Which one are you? Are you a person who makes things happen? Are you a person willing to make things happen? Are you willing to step out in faith and do what you can do with your God-given ability? Or are you number two? This watch. We got a lot of watchers. A lot of watchers. Or are you number three? You wake up one day, what happened? I wonder what happened. We better get that back in balance, because you are seeing the cause and effect of your land, your rights, your property, your income, your savings, your retirement, wherever you want to close your eyes and point your finger. Because remember this, our adversaries are doers. They're doers. Because we're seeing it's being done. And we're sitting here, what happened? We have a very false sense of security in this nation, because we have been so blessed and so protected by God for so many years. But we pushed him out, and we wonder why the enemy is now just at Mach 3 with their tail on fire coming at us. The Bible says we fight not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual and powers in high places. Okay? We have a spiritual battle that we're seeing manifested in the physical. That's why we need the aid of Almighty God. George Washington recognized it. Do you know that every war that's ever been fought has been fought with less than 2.5% of the populace? That's why you guys are my heroes. So I salute you. The Revolutionary War was less than 2.5%. The War of 1812 was less than 2.5%. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, on and on it goes. A few select men and women who have stood up, and stepped up to the American public and our way of life and given a blank check that may cost them their life. freedom, not free. Therefore, in section 4 contains the proposition offered to the people of Oregon for acceptance or rejection. Part 5 is percentum of the net proceeds of the sale of the public land lying within each state, said to be held and sold by Congress. And there's a whole mathematical figure that they came up with in these admission acts, etc. That the foregoing proposition herein, before offered, are the conditions that the people of Oregon shall provide by ordinance, irrevocable without consent of the United States, that the said state shall never interfere with the primary disposal of the soil within the same of the United States, or with any regulation Congress may find necessary for securing the title in said state soil to bona fide purchaser thereof, and that in no case shall a non-resident proprietor be taxed higher than a resident. And it gives the statute there. Now that's a very interesting that is in all of the enabling acts. When the state relinquished the land, only one state in the United States did not do that. That's Texas. That's why Texas is known as the Lone Star State. That's why they call it the Republic of Texas. Texas said, we're not giving our land back. We bled, fought, and died to have this land, and we're not giving it up. But the other states did, Oregon, Montana, Idaho, and on and on and on and on. But that very thing that I read to you in the enabling acts forbids the state entering any state legislation, law, enactment, policy that infringes upon your land. Okay? Another protective covenant. It's what we call in the law. They're called protective covenants. So when Congress was mandated by Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, to dispose of those lands, the states had nothing to say about it. And here's why. Because the forever clause, the continued down the element of time with that protective covenant to protect you and your land. You getting the picture here? Very important that you understand that. If you don't, boy, speak up. Because if you don't, won't understand how to protect it. It's not a self-executing document. We had an incident in Klamath Falls, Oregon, 25 years ago. They came after the water like they're coming after your water. 1,200 families said, you're not taking the water. Just like Bundy said, you're not taking our water and our land and our grazing, whatever. And they stood up and you saw what happened. The greatest fear government has is for you to have cojones enough to stand up and say no. They came after those people with water, and the day the federal agent showed up, there were 1,200 families, wives with shotguns and pistols and kids with 22s. And they said, somebody's going to bleed and die here today if you try to take our water. The federal agents threatened. They said, what are you going to do, take our water? They were trying to do that. I talked to one of those federal agents about 2 months after that incident. They finally turned around and said, hey, we're out of here. I'm not dying over that water. That federal agent said, that scared me to death. I have never seen the public bear arms against me, and I'm the one wearing the badge and the pistol. Said, that scared me to death.
Good.
Do you realize how much power you have? It's why we have a Second Amendment. To protect your life, your family, your liberty, and your property. There's a place for negotiation. But when it's obvious it isn't going to work, then you better be willing to take the next stand. Are you a doer that makes things happen? You're going to watch things happen and watch our nation crumble because we don't have any guts and no backbone. That's what this is about here today, folks. We're talking about land and land patents. But it's much, much bigger than that. But that's the foundation. What is your decision? Which one of the three are you going to be? I pose that question to you folks here today. Okay? At the bottom, page 18, the Act of Congress admitting Oregon into the Union on February 14th, 1859, established for the state, shall never interfere with the primary disposal of soil. Look at the word never. How long is never?
As long as forever.
You see my correlation to the forever, and now it's never, and it's in perpetuity, which is without end. String gets longer, doesn't it? Those are protected covenants. The state's responsibility as a government is to protect you and your land and your rights. Now they work like hell and hard as they can to try to take them away from you. What are we doing? What are we doing?
I have a question.
Turn to the next page, yes.
I guess I'm not clear on what's going on there. So Oregon, to become part of the United States, transferred its rights to...
I'm sorry, sir. I've got a hearing defect from Vietnam.
So for Oregon to become a member of the United States, the state transferred its rights to its state land to the federal government?
All unappropriated lands went into the federal trust, the trust the United States set up, and treaty demanded that. The land did not go to the United States. It went into trust lands. And when the states became states, by the law of possession, then the states acquired that land and title to that land. So in order for them, they said, well, let us do the disposal. We were still trying to build a country here.
Right.
So then they relinquished that land back to the trust for the Congress to dispose of those land back to the individual of the states, of each of the states.
Okay, so that land in all these states but Texas is still in that land trust federal government.
The only land that's in the land trust are the public lands in the public domain. All this patented land that you folks own is out of that trust and is in your private possession, private ownership, and private authority and jurisdiction.
It was transferred back
That is correct.
by patent title.
And that's what the patent does.
All right.
The patent is the evidence of law.
Okay.
The ownership, the right, title, and interest comes from law, which is called Act of Congress. Yes?
That trust is, by law, necessarily disposed of, not kept in
That
the
is correct.
federal trust. So
That's
when
correct.
the feds have not disposed of it, they're in violation of
That
their
is
own
correct.
law.
I'm going to get into that later today about FLPMA. How many of you know about FLPMA? Federal Land Policy Management Act. Unlawful as it can be. So many holes in that bucket. I compare it to a screen door in a submarine. Congress cannot self-enact an enactment to take the public land. Hear what I said? Public land. I didn't say federal land. I get irritated when people go, well, that's BLM land, that's Forest Service land, that's government land. No, it isn't, unless it's a military base or a shipping dock. It's yours, folks. Yes?
What change that make, most of the eastern states have no federal land or very little. So what changed? All the western states seem to have massive reserves that the federal government owns.
Because the federal government violated the contract agreement between the states and the federal government when they agreed if they would transfer the land into the federal trust for disbursement, not for possession, but for disbursement. They didn't do that. The federal government reneged upon the contract agreement of the states.
Wasn't that just the western states?
Just the western states. West of the Mississippi.
West of the Mississippi.
But we're talking about the Enabling Act now.
That is correct.
Right. You going to get into that later at all?
Yes.
And that has to do with the point in time and the realization of the great wealth of minerals and resources in the western states.
That is the whole reason why they did not dispose of the rest of the lands.
Precisely.
The unfortunate thing that we find, and you folks know it as well as I do, that we have greedy people in government. And we got greedy people who are not in government. The Bible says it is easier for the camel to go through the eye of the needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. The rich young ruler came to Jesus and said, "What must I do to be saved? I've done all the 10 commandments." Pat himself on the back. And it's commendable. The Lord said, "Yeah, you did do that. But only one thing I ask. Sell all you have and follow me." The rich young ruler turned and walked away. Lazarus in the Bible and Abraham talks about that rich young ruler, about the great crevasse, etc. Yes?
Sir, so when we're talking about land transfers,
Speak up, please.
when we're talking about land transfers from federal,
From the states to the
from
federal.
the states
Okay.
to federal taking,
Right.
we'll say. Roosevelt and a couple presidents before that did it with executive order. Now, we're still living under that. To me, that was just gross. We didn't follow the will of the people at all.
Just this morning, funny you bring that up. Thank you for that question. As Rex and I were driving in, and Joel, I got a call from one of my researchers. I got some excellent researchers. These guys are phenomenal. I told him we got some issues about they want to expand the wilderness area and the monuments, tie them all together. My two counties, Jackson and Josephine County, Oregon, are the two richest independent counties of any place in the western United States. There have been mineral surveys that have been done. Enormous mineral wealth. And we're broke. Sheriff Department has 2 patrolmen. Used to have 8. County can't do this, can't do that. Part of that's a misappropriation of money, but that's a whole different issue. But the point that I'm making here, I've done extensive research on the Wilderness Act and the Monument Act and all of those. With the exception of 2, they're all unlawful. Do you hear what I said? All but 2 are unlawful. It is required that those lands, if they're going to be tied up, has to have a mineral survey done. Because if you go to HR, once you write this down, HR 365, it's called the 1866 Mining Law. And I want you folks to go read that when you get a chance. It's called HR Henry Ron 365, called the 1866 Mining Law. Has 11 parts to that act. And that grant granted to you and I all of the minerals in the United States that has not already been claimed. You have as much right to go search for minerals, make a claim as I do. And I've been in the mining business 40 years. True of everyone in here. That was granted, granted, to you and I. Once a land is disposed, I shared with you under Fletcher versus Peck, and many other cases, that land is then divested from the United States authority and control, other than administrative, for the mineral claimants that come on that land. It's called public domain. Public lands and public domain are not one and the same. Domain means that the land has not been appropriated for any use. But that does not mean that the mineral potential to acquire that mineral is not available, because it is available. Does that make any sense to you? That's why it's called a claim. You file a mining claim. Very important. When Congress disposed of those lands, the mineral I'm talking about, there can be no other claim put on it. And yet they're giving it away to wildernesses and all of these different monument areas and study areas and this and that. Totally, totally, totally unlawful. Congress does not have the authority to do that. They've already predisposed that land. Okay? There's case law galore on it. Okay? If you notice at the bottom of page 18, by the United States or any regulatory Congress may find necessary for securing the title in said soil to a bona fide purchaser thereof, and the supremacy clause, property clause, commerce clause, or the national mining law. These are elements of protection for the granting of properties within a state. Okay? Alrighty, page 19. I threw this in. It's not applicable to Montana because Montana has its own. I just didn't have it handy to put it in the book when I need to get this done. And it's called ORS, Oregon Revised Statute 164.075. And this basically says, and I'm going to paraphrase it here for you, this says that it's a state enactment that any infringement upon your private property is a felony. Okay? It's a felony. The state and the enactments of those laws, it's theft by extortion of whatever means. And that's important for your state. You have one of these too. I just don't have the number here this morning. Very important. What it's trying to tell you in all this that I've shared, your patented land is important and it has a lot of protective covenants to it. Okay? Another benefit of all the multiple protective covenants. There's an element of law, it's Latin, it's called parametera. Parametera simply means that whenever there is a potential challenge or any legislative proposed enactment, they have to go back and look at all of the savings clauses together. Here's what we're doing. The legal system is picking one thing out and then they attack it from this way and that way and whatever and totally violate the protective covenants of your land and your rights. It's called parametera. I have a document, it's called the Congressional Record of 2000. Incredible document. I want to encourage you to go look it up. I wish I'd have brought it. I'm glad to share it with you. But they tried to take some property from people in northern Nevada. And in that, it ended up going clear to Congress for testimony. And Congressman Jim Gibbons from Nevada had addressed the issue under professional testimony, expert testimony, of the very fact of all of these protective covenants having to do with your roads that are under RS 2477, which means roads that are prior to 1976, are protected. The Forest Service, the BLM, cannot close those roads. There's no provision in law to do that. None. Because they have a proprietary right. And they have a right by virtue of all of the parametera, the saving clause, for you and I to have access to our land. It's our land. It's not government land. And I get irritated when I hear, well, that's Forest Service land. I want to see the title. We're going to break to have a lunch here. I want to share one quick story with you. I was called as a consultant to a criminal charge against a miner. And this miner had found a mineral claim that had been abandoned. And I'm talking about statutory abandonment. In other words, by law, it was abandoned. In other words, it was open for him to go in and to claim that land. He did that, did the research, was clear. He claimed that land, cleaned it up, took 5 3/4-ton pickup loads of trash, of metal, iron. The hippies had it and had a pot growing operation going for a number of years. The BLM never did a thing about that. Once he filed on that mineral claim, cleaned it up, cleaned the cabin, a cute little cabin, pretty well structured, cleaned out mice and rats and an old sofa and recliner and cans and garbage, cleaned that all up, painted the inside. The BLM came along and arrested him for federal theft of federal property, or under the theft of federal property. He said, "You going to tell me that that's your property? How come you didn't clean it up? That's your right." See, they're supposed to clean that stuff up. Make a long story short, took him to jail, booked him, next day turned him loose, and filed 5 criminal charges against him. Okay? So when he got an attorney, he said, got a public defender. In most instances, I'm very adamant against that because they usually sell you out. But he got a good one. Young lady, sharp gal. He said, "I want Ron Gibson to be a consultant to you because this is related to mining." She agreed. Sure. So I came in, we met. She said, "Tell me about the mining law." We spent all afternoon giving her my Reader's Digest version of the mining law. I teach mining law. And she said, "Very interesting." So anyway, we went through the learning curve and the right of ingress and egress and the right of possession, and the mining claim acts as a patent. Even though you don't have the paper, it has that protective covenant because it's tied to national defense. We go to court. And as we're in the courtroom, the prosecutor called 4 Bureau of Land Management witnesses. Your name, and I'll skip a lot of the stuff. And anyway, all of them said, the prosecutor and the attorney said, this land said, "Well, whose land is it?" And he said, "It's BLM land." I've got to bend over my back. Oh, sorry. And I'm going, she didn't hear me. 4 witnesses. And finally, I got a note, slipped it to Dusty, the defendant. Got it to him. I said, "Call a recess." So about 10 minutes later, she called for recess. We went outside the hall. And I said, "Greta," "you got to call those witnesses back from the Bureau of Land Management." She said, "Why?" And I said, "Because you allowed them to give testimony that the ownership of that land belonged to the Bureau of Land Management and not to Dusty Ford." She went, "Oh, you're right, I forgot all about that." So we go back into court. About 8-10 minutes later, she tells the judge, "I want a recross-examination some of the Bureau of Land Management witnesses." Is that okay? So she calls him up. She did a beautiful job. She just absolutely filleted those witnesses. It was unbelievable. I was so proud of her, I wanted to give her a kiss. No, she did a good job. But let me give you one instance, and then it was repeated. Then we'll go to lunch. She said, "You're under oath. So your testimony still is subject to, what's the word? Yeah. And my mind's going 100 miles an hour. I work like that. She said, "You testified earlier that this land belonged to the Bureau of Land Management, did you not?" And he said, "Yes." She said, "Well then, do you have the title with you?" And the guy said, "Pardon me?" She said, "The question I asked you, you claim that you gave personal testimony under oath that you in fact testified that this was BLM land. Is that correct? And he said, yes. She said, do you have the title with you? He said, well, no. She said, well, do you have it at your office? He said, well, no. She said, well, is it anywhere in the BLM building in Medford? Well, I don't know. She said, wait a minute. You testified that under oath that this was BLM land. I want to know how you know it's BLM land. Where's the title? Have you seen the title? No. Have you ever known anybody that saw the title? No. I mean, she just carves this guy's testimony up. It was beautiful. She said, then what you're telling us in this court, that you perjured yourself because you don't know that it belongs to the Bureau of Land Management, do you? Well, I'm sure it does. She said, that isn't my question. Do you or do you not know that this land belongs to the Bureau of Land Management? She said, you don't, do you? Because you can't produce the title. You haven't seen the title, you just testified to that. Which is it? You testified before that you knew it was. Now you're saying you don't know. So what that tells me is, in the court, you don't know. Isn't that correct? Well, yeah. You're excused. Call 2 more of the 4. She called a total of 3. She then calls Dusty Ford, my friend. Puts him on, gives his name, all of the pertinent stuff like attorneys do. Said, Mr. Ford, do you believe that you have a right to that land? He said, yes, ma'am, I do. She said, on what basis do you have a right to that land? He said, by my title. The whole jury, they straightened up. Said, title? He said, yes, ma'am. She said, well, do you have a title with you? He said, yes, ma'am, I do. She said, may I see it? He said, yes, ma'am. Opened his coat up, pulled out, had a 8.5 by 11, folded up. She said, would you please tell the court what this is? Said, this is my mineral claim filing, which I did in accordance with the law, signed it, dated it, paid the fee to the county, had it properly recorded, and he pointed to it, and she held it there for him. Said, then I sent it to the Bureau of Land Management in Portland, Oregon, and they accepted it, stamped it, and issued me an ORMC number. She said, would you tell the court what an ORMC number is? That's Oregon Mining Recorded lost my train of thought. ORMC, Oregon Recorded Mining Claim, excuse me. And it said, they issue a number. He said, that's his number at the top. And he said, that by law is my title. She said, well, how do you know it's your title? He said, Title 30, Section 53, the law of possession. One of the jurors said, may I see that? Attorney said, Your Honor? He said, you bet. She hands him the document. So all the jurors were trying to see that document. Passed it around. It took the jury less than 10 minutes. Not guilty on all counts. That's what your patent title is to do for you. Okay? It's your title. It belongs to you and to you alone. Not to the state, not to the government, not to the EPA, none of that. Quickly, let's move on. I'm going to jump around here a little bit. The reason being, we need to cover a subject here very quickly about how to bring your land patent forward. I don't want us to run out of time because what I want to do, I'd like to do, but it's up to you. Toward the end of the day, I'd like to have at least an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of question and answer. So I'd like to cover this stuff because probably a lot of your questions are going to be related to this. But before we go any further, I want to read you something. It's a case, excuse me. And this case is called the City of Dallas versus Mitchell. And I want to read this to you. It said, the right of the individuals are not derived from governmental agencies, either municipal, state, or federal, or even the Constitution. Remember what I shared with you earlier, that our rights are inalienable. The Constitution just reaffirms them. Okay? And also the Constitution puts a limit on government. They exist inherently in every man by endowment of their Creator, and are merely reaffirmed in the Constitution and restricted only, listen to this carefully, restricted only to the extent that they have been voluntarily surrendered by the citizenship to the agencies of government. Hello? Let me read it again. You better catch this, folks, because it doesn't get any more important than this. Your rights, they exist inherently in every man by the endowment of our Creator, and are merely reaffirmed in the Constitution and restricted only to the extent that they have been voluntarily surrendered by the citizenship to the agencies of government. Wow.
Give us that citing again.
The city of Dallas, it's in the book. It's in the book. Yes.
Can I juxtapose this with the Erie Railroad Doctrine? Are you familiar with that?
I'm sorry, Joel, I can't hear you.
Can I juxtapose this with the Erie Railroad Doctrine when 1934 it was presumed that everybody has given up their rights and become a federal citizen? You have no rights. If you have a Social Security number, any sovereignty you used to have has been overlaid. You have none.
Yes. Now I want you to understand what's being said here. Remember me addressing the issue of jurisdiction and authority, or authority and jurisdiction? You're the king, folks. I want to go back to this book. It's called The Constitution for the United States of America. Do you know that when this was drafted, it went to the Commonwealth of Delaware with the first recipients of the constitutional draft for signing? The people in the Commonwealth of Delaware said, wait a minute, there's something missing. And I don't know, I can't find enough of the record to make a positive determination, but it brings me to the conclusion of two potential causes. They added the first sentence to this document, and the first three words are what? We the people. Little did they know, or maybe they did know by divine intervention, I don't know. But that, based upon our constitutional document, made you and I kings of our land. Okay? And I said earlier, we need to stop acting like slaves and start functioning like kings, because you are. It's your decision. Remember, we talked about the three people? Let me read the rest of this quickly. The people's rights are derived from the government, but the governments are not derived by the government, but the government's authority comes from the people. We're the boss. We're the king. That's where administrative law has switched 180 degrees. Now the government wants to be the boss and we're the slaves. The Constitution states again that these rights already exist, and that the legislative encroachment by nation, state, or municipality invade those original and permanent rights. Permanent rights. Permanent rights. What's permanent mean? Without end, isn't it? Forever, however you want to define it. In perpetuity. All of those are molded into one. Another protective covenant, folks. You only give up don't have rights if you give it up. Municipality, they use the permanent rights. It is the duty of the courts. We get back to Article 6, Clause 2, the Supremacy Clause. The duty. Most people don't even understand, especially politicians and the legal profession, what duty even means anymore. Same with your fiduciary responsibility. Every elected official, every hired person in government has a fiduciary responsibility to you, their boss. And why we sit still and let them tell us is beyond me. And I pray to God from this day forward that you don't put up with that. Okay? It is the duty of the courts to declare and to afford the necessary relief. The fewer restrictions that surround an individual's liberty of the citizen, except those for preservation of the public health, safety, and morals, are more contented when the people and the more successful the republic is. Kind of an interesting thought, isn't it? I want to read to you. I have a very dear friend of mine. How many of you know Tom DeWeese? You've heard of him? A few of you have. I have had the honor of being asked to be one of the featured speakers at the International Symposium on Land Rights in Ontario, Canada on the 4th of October. That's an international event. I'd like to invite every one of you. It's on the 4th of October. And if you're interested, I'll get it to Rex, the location and time and whatever. But for you folks who are really interested in this land right thing, I'm working with some people up there, crackerjack people, sharp at this patent stuff. One of the gals named Elizabeth Marshall. Boy, that gal, she's pretty special. We share information back and forth, but I've had the honor of being asked to be one of the featured speakers at that event. People from all over the world are going to be there. And going to be a very interesting. Australia has a constitution. They have a patent process. Canada does. You know, people from Europe, etc., etc. So I'd like to invite you and encourage you to come and go if you can. I want to read you what Tom DeWeese put together, and he allowed me to put it in my book. The title of this is What Does Private Property Rights Mean? Go to page 47 in your book. You can follow along with me. Page 47. Top of the page. I'm going to start down a little bit here at the second paragraph. As the founding father John Adams, the moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not sacred as the law of God, and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence. Boy, does that sound familiar? You bet it does, doesn't it? Okay, let's go on. President Calvin Coolidge said, ultimately, property rights and personal rights are one and the same, and that's true. That comes from this book, the Bible. Okay? Because our right to land ownership is an inalienable right throughout Scripture. Rancher and property, ranch activist Wayne Haig. If you do not have right, if you don't have the right to own and control property, then you are property. And that's true. That's why the administrative courts and all of this are trying to divest you out of your land and your home. They don't care what it costs you. They don't care how it hurts. They don't care whether your children have a home. to go lay and become home at night and have security. A home is a security place, isn't it? It's your sanctuary, or should be. It's what it's intended to be. Are you going to give it up? Or are you going to sit there and do nothing about it? It's your choice. Private property means, and I want you to follow along with me in it, because boy, this is important. The owner's exclusive authority to determine how property of his or her property is used. That's a property right. And that gets back to your question here, sir, about some of the bullet point issues, and I think this probably answered that as well as I could of anything that I could say. Number 2, the owner's peaceful possession, control, and enjoyment of his or her legally granted, purchased, or deeded property, or private property. Number 3, the owner's ability to make contracts to sell, rent, or to give away all or part of the legally granted, purchased, deeded private property. The local county, city, state, and federal government are prohibited from exercising eminent domain for the sole purpose of acquiring legally purchased, deeded private property so as to resell to a private interest or to generate revenue. Boy, we see that all over, don't we? Okay? I want to go back to the top of the page a minute. I saw something that I forgot. Let me read that first. The Fifth Amendment treaties by the Washington State Supreme Court Justice Richard Sanders, and he writes, and I quote, "Our state and most other states define property in an extremely broad sense. That definition is as follows. Property is a thing that consists not merely of its ownership and possession, but of its unrestricted right of use." Anybody here in Montana got land use restrictions on your property? Do, don't you? Boy, is this saying a lot. But their unrestricted right of use, enjoyment, and disposal. Anything that destroys any of the elements of property to that extent destroys the property itself. The substantial value of property lies with its use. You get that? That's why you want to make good benefit and use of your land and your water. If the right of the use is denied, the value of the property is diminished. And the ownership is rendered a barren right. A barren right. What's it mean when something is barren? Doesn't produce anything, does it? And I don't just mean the growth. And you're restricted of your land and like somebody got their hand around your throat. Okay, let's go on to number 5, page 48. That no local, county, state, or federal government has the authority to impose directives, ordinances, fees, fines regarding these landscaping, color, selection of trees, planting, preservations, or all of this other stuff, or open space, or legally purchased, deeded private property. You go to build a house, they want you to put a plant here, they want you to put this over there. What a bunch of garbage. Number 6, that no local, city, county, or federal government shall implement a land use plan that requires any part of your legal, possessed, deeded, or private property to be set aside for public use or for natural resource protection areas, directing that no conservation or disturbances may occur. Boy, we see that, don't we? Number 7, that no local, city, county, state, or federal government shall implement a law or ordinance restricting the number of dwellings that may be placed on a legally purchased, deeded property, private property. Number 8, that no local, city, county, state, or federal government shall alter the imposed zoning restrictions or restrictions that will devalue or limit the ability to sell legally purchased, deeded private property. Number 10, that no local, city, county, or federal government representative or their assigned agents may may enter private property without written permission to the property owner or as to the possession of an unlawful warrant from a legitimate court of law. This includes invasion of private rights and privacy by government. Use is unmanned drone flights. You realize your property goes up in the air? I don't know if you knew that. I want to mention anything that has to do with water on your land, whether it be a drilled well, a spring, artesian pond, belongs to you. A lot of the states now want to try to have permits for your well. Don't ever do that. Whatever you do, don't give up your water. Yes?
Some of the well drillers won't drill a well because they think you have to have a permit.
Well,
Find another
there's a way around that. Okay.
What about rainwater?
Now, I'm not talking so much about the permit of the drilling, but I'm talking about more of the monitoring your wells after they're drilled.
Well, I know, I talked to people in the state of Washington, they own a piece of property, they will not let them drill a well there since there's no water. They can only live on their property 4 months out of the year.
Well, they need to stand up and do something about that, haven't they? That illustrates my point. We claim we're free, and yet we're allowing all of this stuff to choke us and choke us and choke us and choke us. Which are you, a king or are you a slave? Case in point, at the bottom, page 48. Neither a town nor its officers have any right to appropriate or interfere with private property. Mitchell versus City of Rockland.
Brings up another question. How about all these covenants that you're supposed to sign before you can buy a property that's not done by the city or thing, but some kind of a board of a subdivision or something? Homeowners association.
I personally have been involved in a very similar situation. And we got together and we went and we bought a drill rig ourselves. We drilled our own well, put our own casing in. That ended the argument. There's an old saying, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission. Okay?
Yep.
Well, they want to tell you you can't park a car in your driveway. They want to tell you, you know, these.
What did we just read?
But don't live there.
Are you going to surrender voluntarily to that? You're only subject to that if you yield to it.
Well, I guess they make you sign an agreement before they sell you the property.
Well, if that's a term and condition, I would say you keep your property. Because with restriction on it, you have no property. You may have a dwelling place, but you have no property. Because then you are property.